another issue that where I've just kind of made the personal decision of I'll do whatever I need to do on this. I'll give my life for this cause. Is the issue of abortion, and I appreciated the first appendix of your book where you address this, and it was interesting. One of the points you kept bringing up that almost seemed like it was a refuter or a response to every single pro-choice argument was basically asking, are preborns people? At least it comes up in a number of the different
Yeah.
responses. Uh, as a final question, could you just unpack a little bit of why that issue of personhood is so central as we think about that issue?
Sure. I have been a student of the 20th century, looking really deeply for probably the better part of 15 years. Systems of totalitarianism, oppression, genocide. So I spent quite a bit of time researching the genocide in Darfur, genocide in Rwanda, in the Congo, the over 100 million image bearer body count of communism in the 20th century, whether that's through Stalin or Mao, Enver Pasha's Turkey, the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia. I've been studying for a long time what leads to such radical evil. And what you often find is a distinction, and this is a distinction that Hitler stated explicitly, between lives worth living and lives not worth living. There's actually a phrase in German for lives not worth living that Hitler coined. And so anytime I see those distinctions being made, huge alarm bells go off in my head. Like, look, we've done this before. It never ends well. Well, when it comes to a lot of the abortion conversation, I hear that language pop up again and again and again, whether it's the argument that, well, if the mother is economically challenged, then it's cruel to force her to bring her preborn into the world. What's underneath an argument like that? The assumption that their lives not worth living. If the economic burden is too high, this life crosses that threshold from worth to not worth living. And I find this distinction behind most of the pro-choice arguments or pro-abortion arguments that I unpacked in the book, that there are certain lives not worth living. Let me just be frank. You were saying, there's certain issues that, as you and I get a little older, we just kind of the gloves come off and it's like, let's just say what needs to be said. If we think that future generations are going to look back on the 21st century, or really America since 1973, Roe v. Wade, with hundreds of millions of casualties, and say that those who thought of themselves as so progressive and so, quote, woke and so on the right side of history, murdered that many tiny image bearers of God and thought that they were on the right side of history. If we think the future is going to judge this generation kindly, we're deluded. We really are. And this isn't, I'm not being theological here. I'm not imposing my metaphysics or anything like that. When I say that the preborn is a human being, this isn't a matter of metaphysical or theological speculation. This is just a matter of plain basic science. It really is. I quote in the book the French geneticist Lejeune, Pierre Lejeune, and he says exactly the same point, that to dispute whether a preborn fetus is a human being is not a matter of metaphysical speculation. It's a matter of plain fact. And so you see this with, the argument, oh, well, it's a woman's body, therefore a woman's choice, which, by the way, in the book, I get into what I think are a lot of the winning pro-life arguments moving forward, which isn't merely the full humanity of the preborn, but also the devastating effects of the abortion industry on women. That's something we tend to not talk about a lot, but I detail and document a lot of these in the book. The aftermath of getting abortion, the effect that it has on women's mental health, on their physical health. There's this whole line of goods we've been sold about. No, it's a good for women that needs to be protected. It is devastating on women. But for the preborn, um, what you have is, let's take a pregnant woman and ask the question, how many fingers, draw a circle around her and say, how many fingers does that person have? Does she have 20 fingers? How many hearts does that woman have? Does she have 2 hearts? How many brains does she have? Does she have 2 brains? In about roughly 50% of the cases, does that woman have a penis? Well, if we're going to say it's all the woman's body, we have to answer all those questions in the affirmative, which is just bad science in just such an obvious way. And so what we're dealing with is a body with its own distinct, unique genetic code that is not identical to the mother's genetic code. And as Christians, if we aren't speaking up about the rights, there's this famous ethical axiom that Paul Ramsey, one of the great ethicists of the 20th century, articulated, that any culture, its moral health can be determined by one question: how does it treat its most vulnerable? Mm. The moral health of any society can be determined by answering that question: how does it treat its most vulnerable? And how much more vulnerable can you get than I'm a tiny human being I can't say, let me live. If we aren't being the voice for the voiceless in our society, then we have no right to pretend we're on the side of justice.